If you're new here, I'm Selena Reams, and this is the Creative Evolution Lab. This is the show where we unpack the intersection of consciousness, transformation, and science. And I'm so glad to have you here joining me as we follow this critical path we're all on of our personal and our collective evolution. This necessary unfolding that we're in. So today we're going to take a look at Alain de Botton and Krista Tippett's interview, which is called The True Hard Work of Love and Relationships. And this is on Krista's show, On Being. So I'm going to unpack some points that kind of have come alive for me in my conversations with my community and my friends, and we'll take a look at some of these different layers. So this interview starts in the conversation around intimate relationships, and then it broadens out to how this is really relevant to societal relationships. So the first place I want to start is how most of us start a relationship. There are a lot of things we may not be getting right in relationships at this point in our culture. And this is a lens to inform us how we can continue to grow in this complex arena between humans, this vulnerability, this messiness, this emotion piece. And then we bring in all of our past history and wounding and attachment styles and upbringing. So it can get pretty messy. It's like this messy soup. So I love this conversation as another way to look, as another lens to approach relationship through. Let's start here. Let's start with the way that we often start relationships. And I'm going to talk specifically about how we often start dating relationships. So as many of you know, I've dated, had relationships, but been on and off single for a while. So I've been on my share of dates, and there's often some version in my experience of, here, this is me showing up. Here's my evolved, cool, put together self side, which is also at the same time, like I have this facade of here's my evolved, cool version of me, but also simultaneously in the background, I'm scanning for your faults. I'm scanning for red flags. So think about this going on in me, and then there's this other human. And they're bringing some version of that too. So it's like, here's our facades of our cool version of ourselves. And it may not be a facade, that's actually part of us too. And in the background, we're all like looking for something to trigger us and have it be okay for us to run away. So, and we often start the relationship, and we start the first few months of operating from this part of ourselves, operating from this best face forward. Sometimes it's a performance, sometimes it's just simply more of our essence, which is great. And we build an entire story about this other person, and they build an entire story about us. And we come into this relationship from this story we've created based on a very limited experience we've had of each other. And it can feel very intimate, it can feel very real, and we can go into these vulnerable places. And yet I propose it's still just a part of who we really are, still just a part of our fullest expression. So we build this relationship in these first few months or whatever it is on that part. And then we have the audacity to act astonished, like just purely astonished, like I can't believe this. When we start to see the other sides of this human, when they start to unfold. And inevitably our wounded patterns will get triggered, and they will take us out of that cool facade. They will take us out of that that mask that we've been wearing, or that just one side of us that we've been showing. Sometimes it's more of a mask. Sometimes it's just less, single faceted. And so inevitably these triggers take us out, and they take us into our patterns. And this is where Alain de Botton doesn't talk about this here, but patterns become really valuable, being able to see our patterns. And if you're in your 40s like me, and you're in the dating world, or you've been in relationship world, there is an advantage to being at this age and to having done some work to grow our own awareness of our own patterns. So we can start to see our pattern. And maybe, if it's like, sometimes it's not to our 40s where we really see our patterns and we start to go, oh, maybe some of this is me, right? Like maybe it's not just all these other people that I've been in relationships with. Maybe there's something here too. And so if we're lucky, we start to do some of that work, and we start to wake up and have some awareness around how we're showing up, what we're bringing. And then we can see where it gets really complex, because we've got these two humans, and probably the older we get, the more complex we are, and the more defendedness we have, the more wounding we have, the more, but also the beauty, the more wisdom, the more awareness we can bring. And the more we're getting to know ourselves. When we're really young, we just have no idea. We just don't know ourselves at all. And I think it's an unfolding over a lifetime to know ourselves. I'm just uncovering parts of myself that I had no idea. So we have more awareness, but I'm not saying it's done. And there's another part I want to point to here, and he talks about this at the end of the, Krista Tippett actually asks him, because she's actually single, and I think dating, she's been single for a couple years. But she asks him about the impact of online dating, and one of the things he refers to, I want to pull in here, when we're in a newer relationship, or we're in relationship at all, and inevitably our human flaws start to reveal themselves. And inevitably some flaws push our buttons more than others, and we get triggered and our own stuff comes up, and there's this escalating thing that can happen. We often point to the other person. It's them, it's the wrong relationship, it's bad, and sometimes it's not a great fit, right? Let's be honest. But so often we other it, we make it about them, and we make it outside of ourselves. And one of the things around online dating that actually contributes to the rapidness with which we are willing to get out and stop a relationship sometimes is this, in this area of the online dating, is having the illusion of an endless, readily available supply of possible partners in our back pocket through this world of the internet, so that we are quicker to leave when we think there's an endless supply. Think about it. If this was the only person in the world that we had an option relationship with, we might stick around. We might try to work through some things. And so just being aware that having that in our back pocket of this illusion of endless supply, readily available at my fingertips, relationships, can play a role in there. So just, I invite people to be really aware of that if that's in your space. It reduces our willingness to move beyond the initial discomforts. It reduces our willingness often to give grace to somebody, to give grace to, even if they're nervous on a first date, to give that grace. Like they're talking too much, talking about themselves too much. Da, da, da. You know, we think about, Alain de Botton talks about this in his interview. We often give such grace to a child around this, or even in an emotional upset, or in the way they're showing up in any given moment. We often will hand them like, oh, they're hungry, they're tired, they're stressed, there's all these factors, and this is just a piece that's showing up in this moment. We often offer that to children, and we don't often offer it to each other as adults, or even to ourselves. So it's an interesting place to start to stretch and look at it. And I know I'm going to be playing with offering increasingly more grace. And that doesn't excuse certain behaviors, but increasingly more grace and understanding to how somebody's showing up. So most of us have some image that we've come by early of what a relationship should look like. This idealized, we put it up on our pedestal, this is the relationship. And most of us have some imprinted image in the back of our minds, so that when we come to dating, when we come to relationship, it's often like, if we think about fishing, like we've got this picture of this perfect relationship and what it's going to look like, and this perfect partner. And so when it comes to relationship, if we imagine this metaphor of fishing, we're out fishing, casting our rod, we get a fish, we pull it up, and we ignore every incredible thing about this particular fish or person in front of us, because all we're doing is comparing it over here to this image, this imprint that we have taken on very early often. And if it doesn't match, we're not even able to, because we are looking through such an agenda, we can't see the gifts, we can't see the richness or the beauty that's available there, and we throw them back. Just, okay, so we become blinded by this image, this illusion of this perfect relationship. And it keeps us from actually seeing. Anytime we're in an agenda, it keeps us from seeing what's really present. So it keeps us from seeing everything that's around us, seeing the beauty, seeing the possibility in the relationships that are around us. And I know when I look back at my own life, certainly there's some discomfort for me around the ways that I've done that I've held this image of what a perfect relationship, or what my relationship I've kept in my head would look like. And it's, if I'm really honest, it's some composite of movies and pulling all the greatest features from different people I've been with. There's, for me, also a partner in college who died, who was incredible, and like having put him on a pedestal, and that's what the perfect relationship will look like. So it's some composite of all of those, which we can see creates this impossible, unattainable standard. And my alliance to that impossible standard keeps me from being present with what's in front of me, with who's in front of me, with all the things that are available there, with this other flawed human. So this idea that there's this unflawed human out there for us, and this idea that we are somehow also unflawed. Alain de Botton talks about how really, we're all in reality crazy. And it would be much more generous and much more real to start a relationship in a conversation more like this. Like, look, I'm crazy. This is how I'm crazy. And how are you crazy? And that would be a much more real and honest start point for us in relationship. And, it might look something like, hey, by the way, starting, like, I imagine a first date. Hey, by the way, just so you know, I can already tell I'm going to be really into you. I'm going to really pull out the stops. I'm going to be super into enjoying time with you, spending time with you. And we're going to start to have some emotions for each other. And when we do start to have those deeper emotions, here's what's going to happen. I just want you to know already. About month 3 or 4, give or take, I'm going to start pulling back really hard. I'm going to be really busy with work. I'm going to be really busy with my daughter. And I'm going to pull back because you know what's going to happen is I'm going to hit my threshold and how much I can go in intimacy. And then I'm going to get triggered and I'm going to need to pull back because it's really uncomfortable. And so I just want you to know that that's what's going to happen. And that's all based on my own intimacy, wounds, losses, attachment style. And so I just want you to know that's what's going to happen. And we can see if we want to do that dance. So that would be a much more honest way to start that relationship. I'm trying to imagine saying this on a first date. I can see it. I can see it with the right person. Some version of that. Yeah, but knowing our patterns. So this is where starting to know our patterns at a certain age, we know if we're looking, if we're doing the work to be aware, we know how we get taken out. We know what it might look like. We know how it's going to impact the other person. I also know, back in that conversation, by the way, I also know it's really going to hurt you when I do this, when I pull back and don't, and you're going to have tasted that version of me, and then you're going to be like, why is she pulling back? I know that's going to hurt you, and it's actually designed to push you away and keep more distance so that I can, keep this intimacy thing from being unlocked too much. like if we could just, say that and then lay it on the table and be like, oh, do we want to do this? Do we want to work with this? Do we want to play in this space? And Alain de Botton's, dry humor he brings, he's like, it actually would be probably a service to others. He says some version of this. It's actually kind of cruel to ask others to enter into an intimate relationship with us. Because we are all so complex. And we all have wounding. We all have all of the conditioning that we have been brought up in, and the expectations and the gaps between our expectations and where we are, and that shame or that pain of that. And we're bringing all of that into this relationship. I want to read this. He says that this might be a more more evolved version of starting out the relationship would be to say something to the effect of, let me just find this right here. But to basically say something to the effect of, so a much more generous starting point would be, love is a painful, poignant, touching attempt by two flawed individuals to try and meet each other's needs in situations of gross uncertainty and ignorance about who they are and who the other person is. But hey, we're going to do our best. And that's a much more generous starting point than what we often come to relationship with, which is that I want you to be perfect. I want you to meet my impossible standards. And oh, by the way, I feel really deficient inside because I'm not meeting those impossible standards within myself. That's probably my version. So you can look and see what is yours. What is your version? And this is beyond dating, right? So even if you're in a relationship or you're not dating or in that arena, this happens in every relationship. It just gets on high in our more intimate relationships. But it can happen everywhere. Yeah. And the start of this shift, he points to, is the acceptance of our own flawed selves and the acceptance of everybody's flawed. You know, there might be a couple people who are enlightened or in this full space of, you know, of these super healthy functional beings, but it's really rare. And then the start here is to accept ourselves as flawed creatures and to know that that's not something, you know, of course we can keep working and growing and evolving, and that is our intention, right? That if we're lucky, we're aligned with that growth. That's part of what this incredible unfolding is about. But to know that it's never going to be this illusion of perfection. To know that we're all meeting in a flawed space. And there's something I speak about a lot with clients, with my communities. It's taking it from being on opposite sides of the table with this other human and being like against each other. Like, you are the enemy, because so often we create this othering, this enemy nature, and getting on the same side of the table. And this is where I can imagine that first date when I'm, you know, like hey, here's my crazy, how's yours? What's yours? So it's rather than saying, here's your crazy and you're wrong and you're bad and I need to get away from you. Sometimes there's safety stuff, so I'm not gonna be like, yes, sometimes that's necessary. But overall, like, rather than othering that person and making them wrong and bad and needing to fight or to flee, right? This is my pattern. What if we set it up at the beginning like, hey, let's get over here on the same side. We are these complex humans, and this is the thing we're looking at and working on. So we're on the same side of the table looking at the challenge ahead of us. Do we want to take this on? Do we want to explore this love? And most of us as humans are just drawn to doing this relationship thing. It's part of this humanity thing. And so do we want to be on the same side of the table looking at these things that are going to come up? They're going to keep coming up. We're going to keep working with them. We're going to keep being in the layers. And we get to choose. And there's a point where they touch in this conversation around the Greek, this old Greek idea of relationships actually being for the betterment of one another. And this is a tricky area, because how many of you have been in a relationship where someone's trying to change you or make you a better person, or vice versa, where in there like, I'll change them. If they're with me, they'll get better. This will change, evolve over time. You know, we'll fix this. So it's a tricky area, but there is something where if two humans are willing to unpack things together, to get on that same side of the table and to look at the challenges in front of them, to look at how they're dovetailing, how their injuries and wounds are dovetailing and triggering one another, and to really be in that work of exploring and healing together, then there is this notion of uplifting one another, of becoming better humans for being in the relationship. And it's messy, right? But I want to conclude with this last part, this quote: self-righteousness is the enemy of love. And I think of self-righteousness as this separation, this othering of people, of being on the opposite side of the table, attacking or being enemies, rather than on the same side of the table. So the self-righteousness puts us into this othering, this opposites, or opposing forces, and being on the same side of the table. That is the love. We're going to get over here together and we're going to look at what's unfolding, and we're committed to being in this unpacking of this, being in tenderness and compassion, getting taken out and coming back. You know, our commitment is larger. It's larger. And I love at the end, at about 30 minutes, they take a little bit of this conversation to allow this to inform us, not just in the private, personal sector, but in the arena of citizens. And oftentimes we're acting out, Krista says, oftentimes we're acting out in public in the same ways we were acting out at our worst in our relationships. And when we think about taking this conversation of bringing our capacity to see beyond the face of what people are showing, which is often our wounding, especially when emotions are high and things are triggered, but seeing beyond where they're, we think about the example of the child. It's like they're hungry, they're tired, they're cranky, they just fell and hit their knee, or their best friend just said something mean to them, and we give the charitable explanation for how somebody is showing up. If we can go beyond the initial facade and our initial reactions, which might be to make them wrong and no way, and we step away from always trying to make somebody a failure or make some shortcoming the focus of our attention, and we can go beyond that into understanding. It doesn't mean we need to agree or be on the same page with something, but to hold love as the larger grace. To hold love as the larger grace. And there's a last quote I will share. I said there's one where this is it. Compatibility is an achievement of love. It must not be its precondition. I invite you to really notice what comes up for you around that. Compatibility is an achievement of love. It must not be its precondition. When we only offer our love and our generous spirit and our compassion to those who have the same mindsets, the same ideas, agree with everything we say, that is not love. That is not pushing love. But love actually is achieving that, achieving our willingness to find common ground, to find grace, to find understanding, even when we have strong feelings about the way something or someone is showing up. It's removing it from the othering of making others wrong and being able to distance ourselves and do things that are hurtful and harmful from that place of making them not human. I'm going to say that one more time. Compatibility is an achievement of love. It must not be its precondition. So if we expand our love and we think about the agape love, a universal love, to hold this larger container of everything and everyone. It doesn't mean we have to love them up close, and I have a whole thing on that. Like, you don't have to love everybody up close. But to hold that intention, that wishing of wellness, may you be well in body, mind, and spirit, and knowing that another's healing, that our healing actually brings us closer to this space of connection and to the space of recognizing our interdependence, our interbeing, that how you are, your well-being actually impacts me and vice versa, and that's everywhere. So I'll leave it with that, and I invite you, actions to carry this forward. Look at where you might be more generous in going beyond your surface reactions with yourself. Go beyond that judgmental inner critic if it's there. Go beyond the standards, the impossible standards you hold for yourself, and bring that compassion and tenderness. Try doing that with others too. Go beyond our initial reactions, our initial resistance. See what's available beyond that. Love is beyond those surface things. And remember, we're all these flawed human beings, and it gets complicated when we start mixing the soup of our flawedness together. So remembering to bring humor, to bring grace, to bring curiosity. And you can connect to the meditation below and also to this original interview, and you can from there find Alinda Botton's books and of course Krista Tippett's show on being, one of my favorites. So much love to you. I hope you've taken some thread from this, something to weave into your day and your life, to open up your insights, to shift, open the next layers of your own evolution. Take care and much love.